Welcome to the channel where legends sleep. Tonight's story takes us to the black-soiled banks of the eternal Nile, where the ancient Egyptians first whispered of gods who loved, betrayed, and conquered death itself. From the sacred temples of Egyptian mythology, a tale rises like river mist at dawn. Older than memory, deeper than any tomb carved into stone. It is the story of a king unmade, of a brother's envy sharp as a desert wind, and of a love so fierce it reached beyond the veil of the dead. A goddess will search a broken world for the pieces of what she lost. A god will descend into darkness and rise wearing a crown of eternal life. And somewhere in that ancient, sacred story, you may find the oldest truth humanity has ever told, that death is not an ending, but a doorway. So lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. There was a time, long before memory had learned to write itself down, when the gods walked upon the earth as easily as the wind moves through tall grass. They came down from the vault of heaven and set their feet upon the black soil of Egypt, and the world was not frightened by them. It welcomed them. The river ran full and generous. The palms stood tall along its banks. The air smelled of warm stone and green water, and something else, something older and sweeter that has no name in any living tongue, but which you might recognize if you have ever stood at the edge of a great river at dawn and felt, without knowing why, that the world was exactly as it should be. In those days, the king of all this beauty was Osiris. He was tall and serene, and the light seemed to settle around him differently than it settled around ordinary things. Softer, more willing. He wore the double crown of a unified land, but he wore it the way a tree wears its leaves, not as a burden or a boast, but simply as what he was. The people of Egypt did not merely obey him, they loved him. They loved him the way the soil loves the flood, not with excitement, but with a deep, grateful certainty that what was coming was good. And beside him, always, was Isis. She was his queen, his sister in the way of the old gods, his equal and his counterpart, and where Osiris was warmth, she was wisdom. Where he was abundance, she was understanding. She moved through the world with a quietness that was not absence, but presence, a stillness so full it had weight. Her eyes were dark and steady, and those who looked into them too long often came away feeling they had glimpsed something ancient, something that had been turning slowly in the deep before the first morning ever broke. The people loved Isis differently than they loved Osiris. They loved her with a reverence that was almost wordless, the way one loves a river without being able to say why the river matters so much. Together, these two ruled Egypt in what the old stories call the Golden Age, and the name is not an exaggeration. Before Osiris came, the people had lived as best they could, scattered, uncertain, eating what the land gave them without understanding how to ask the land for more. It was Osiris who first showed them how to break the soil and lay seed into the dark earth, and how to wait with patience for the green shoots to rise. He taught them the rhythm of planting and harvest, the long, slow breath of the agricultural year, so that they no longer ate in fear, but in anticipation. He walked their fields beside them. He did not instruct from a distance. He knelt in the same black mud and worked with the same hands. And this is why they loved him, not only because he gave them bread, but because he was not ashamed to know how bread was made. Isis moved among the people in her own way. She taught the women the arts of weaving and healing, the careful knowledge of plants and their properties, the words that could be spoken over a wound or a fever to coax the body back toward wholeness. She sat with the grieving and the frightened. She knew the names of things that others had forgotten, and she shared that knowledge freely, as though it belonged to everyone and she was merely returning it. Under her care, the villagers grew not just richer, but wiser. And there is a difference between those two things that matters enormously. The great city of the gods hummed and breathed with life in those years. Temples rose from the desert floor slowly and deliberately, stone placed upon stone, with a care that was itself a form of prayer. Music drifted from the open courtyards at evening. Children ran between the columns. Old men sat near the water and watched the current with the contented expression of those who have seen enough of the world to know that some moments are worth simply sitting inside. The Nile itself seemed to understand what was happening. Each year it rose faithfully, spreading its dark gift of silt across the land, then withdrew in perfect time, leaving the fields ready and grateful. The flooding was neither too great nor too little. The harvests came in golden and heavy. Silos filled and stayed full. There was enough, more than enough, and the particular joy of having more than enough when one remembers what hunger felt like is a joy that runs very deep. Far and wide, the reputation of Osiris spread. People came from distant lands to see the kingdom he had made, and they left carrying seeds, both literal and otherwise, seeds to plant in their own soil and ideas to plant in their own minds. The world, in those years, seemed to be slowly learning something, slowly becoming something, as though civilization itself were a young plant pushing upward through the dark toward a light it could not yet see, but somehow stubbornly trusted. Osiris walked his kingdom each evening in the cooling air, and Isis walked beside him, and the stars came out above the river one by one, and the torches were lit in the houses along the bank, and everything was exactly as it should be. But even in the most luminous age, shadows exist. They are simply harder to see when the light is very bright, harder to notice when you are not looking for them. And in those golden evenings, while Osiris looked out across his beloved land with open and unguarded eyes, someone else was watching. Someone who had always been watching. Someone for whom abundance was not a comfort, but an unbearable reminder of everything he felt he had been denied. His name was Set. He was not without power. The gods had given him dominion over the desert and the storm, over the red and burning places at the edge of the world where nothing grew and nothing rested. He was strong in the way that dry lightning is strong, sudden, total, and without mercy. And yet, for all of that, Set looked at his brother's kingdom and felt something that no amount of storm or sand could fill. Envy is a patient thing. It does not announce itself. It settles slowly like dust after a great wind, until one day you look down and find that everything beneath your feet has changed color. For years, Set had watched. He watched Osiris walk through the green fields and saw the way the people turned toward him, the way their faces opened like flowers. He watched Isis stand beside her husband in the great hall, her voice carrying the ancient words of law and wisdom. And he felt the distance between himself and that warmth as though it were a physical cold. He stood at the edges of feasts and listened to the laughter and the music. And somewhere in the deep and hollow places of his chest, the quiet feeling hardened into something with edges. He began to make a plan. It was not a hasty plan. Nothing about Set was hasty when it mattered. He moved the way the desert moves, slowly, almost imperceptibly, grain by grain, until suddenly the landscape has shifted and nothing looks the way it used to. He gathered around him those who shared his resentments, those who had felt passed over or overlooked in the long reign of the Golden King. 72 in all, some say. 72 who were willing to smile at the feast while hiding something cold beneath the smile. And at the center of his plan was a beautiful thing. Set had a chest made, not an ordinary chest, nothing so plain. This was a coffin of extraordinary craftsmanship, carved from the finest cedar wood and inlaid with ivory and ebony and gold, painted in colors so vivid they seemed almost alive. Flowers wound along its edges. Hieroglyphs of blessing and beauty covered its surface. It was, by any measure, a breathtaking object, the kind of thing that made a person stop and lean forward, wanting to look more closely, wanting to touch. Set had it made in secret, to the precise measurements of his brother's body. Every inch of it fit Osiris perfectly, like a shadow fits the thing that casts it. The feast was held at night, beneath a sky thick with stars. Torches burned in long rows, their light golden and wavering, and the hall was full of music and the smell of roasted meat and sweet wine, and the heavy perfume of lotus blossoms. It was, on the surface, a celebration, lavish and generous, the kind of evening that made the guests feel that life was good and that the world was a place of abundance. Osiris came, as Set had known he would. He came with warmth and ease, greeting the guests by name, accepting the cup that was offered, settling into the comfort of the evening without suspicion. Why would he suspect? This was his brother's house. These were familiar faces. The wine was good, and the music was tender, and the night air carried that soft and ancient smell of the river nearby. Then Set brought out the chest. A murmur moved through the hall, the way a breeze moves through tall grass. Heads turned, eyes widened. Even the musicians slowed and softened, as though the room itself had paused to look. Set smiled and made his offer lightly, as though it were nothing more than a game. Whoever could lie inside the chest and fit it perfectly, he said, would keep it as a gift. Cedar and gold and ivory, a treasure beyond measure. He said it with a laugh, and the guests laughed with him. And one by one they climbed inside and found that it was too long, or too wide, or too short for them, each one slightly wrong, each one smiling as they climbed back out. Osiris watched for a while, amused. Then, because he was without guile and had no reason to see the shape of the thing that was closing around him, he rose and walked to the chest and lay down inside it. It fit him perfectly. For just a moment the room was still. Then Set moved. He moved quickly, and his 72 confederates moved with him. The lid came down. Bolts were driven, lead was poured, molten into the seams, so that no breath of air could pass, so that nothing inside could be opened from within. It was done before anyone understood what had happened, done in the space between one heartbeat and the next. They carried the chest to the Nile and cast it in. The dark water received it without ceremony. There was no great sound, only the soft and indifferent closing of the river over the thing it had been given. The current took it, as the Nile takes everything, and carried it away into the dark. Back in the hall, the torches still burned. The wine was still sweet in the cups, but the music had stopped, and no one was laughing any more. And the air had changed in some way that was difficult to name, as though a warmth had been removed from the room, so gradually that no one had noticed until it was already gone. In the days that followed, something shifted across the land of Egypt. The priests felt it first in the quality of the light at dawn, still present, but thinner somehow, like gold leaf over a surface that was no longer solid. The farmers felt it in the soil, which did not exactly harden, but which seemed less willing, less giving, as though the earth had turned its face away slightly. Children woke in the night without knowing why, and lay quiet in the darkness, listening to a silence that pressed. Order, when it begins to unravel, does not collapse all at once. It loosens at the edges, a thread here, a thread there. Most people carry on as they always have, because that is what people do. They carry on. But somewhere beneath the ordinary surface of days, something was missing that had always been present. Something that, now that it was gone, you could only understand by the shape of its absence. Isis knew. She knew before anyone told her. She knew in the way she had always known the deeper currents of the world, not through sight or sound, but through something older and more intimate than either. She woke in the gray hour before dawn and lay still for a long moment, and the knowing settled over her like cold water. Osiris was gone. She rose from her bed in silence. She tore the fine linen from her shoulders and let her hair fall loose around her face, as was the custom of grief. And then, barefoot on the cool stone, she walked out into the early dark and began to cry out, a sound that was both a wail and a word, both mourning and the first movement of something that would not stay still. Set had taken the king. He had taken the light from the hall and the warmth from the soil and the steady, unnoticed goodness that had held the world together like water holds the riverbank. But he had not counted on Isis. No one who has come after has ever fully accounted for what Isis was willing to do for the one she loved. And the story of what she did next is a long one and a tender one, and it begins, as all great searchers begin, in the dark, with nothing but grief and will and the faintest thread of something that refused to be extinguished. She did not weep where others could see her. That was the first thing. Isis gathered her grief the way one gathers a cloak around the shoulders against a cold wind, pulling it close, holding it tight, letting it warm rather than undo her. She was a goddess, yes, but she was also a wife, and she understood something that grief teaches everyone eventually, that sorrow unspent becomes a kind of fuel, and she would need every measure of it. The palace was wrong without him. The rooms were the same rooms. The light fell through the same openings in the same long golden bars across the floor, but something essential had been removed. The way a fire goes out and the hearth is still warm for a while, still shaped like warmth, still holding the memory of heat, but cold. She walked through those rooms once and did not walk through them again. She wrapped herself in the dark linen of mourning, and she went out into the world. Now, the world in those ancient days was vast and largely uncharted, even to the gods. The Nile stretched north to the sea, and beyond the sea lay other shores, other peoples, other skies. Isis knew that the great cedar chest had been cast into the river, and that the river moved always toward the sea. So she began where the land gave way to water, standing at the edge of the delta where the reeds grew tall and the air tasted of salt and distance, and she listened. This was her great gift. She listened. Other gods commanded. They summoned, they demanded, they bent the world with force. But Isis had always understood that the world speaks constantly, softly, to those willing to be still enough to hear it. She had spent ages learning the secret names of things. She had learned the language of wind moving through papyrus, the conversation of water over stone, the way starlight, arriving from impossible distances, carries information in its silence. She stood at the edge of the delta in her dark linen, and she opened herself entirely to what the world might tell her. For a long time, there was only the sound of the water. Then, slowly, something reached her. Not a voice exactly, more like a current in the air, a pull, a direction. The faintest sense that something belonging to her lay out beyond the flat mirror of the sea, farther than the eye could follow. She turned her face toward it, the way a flower turns toward light without being told to, and she began to walk. The journey was long. Days folded into other days. She passed through towns and settlements where the people had already felt the change in the world, the way animals feel a storm before it arrives. Fields that had grown full and green were yellowing at the edges. Rivers ran lower than they should. People looked at one another with a formless worry they could not name, not understanding that the king who had taught their grandfathers' grandfathers how to plant and harvest and live well was gone, and the world was remembering what it had been before he came. Isis moved through it all like a shadow, her face low, her pace steady. She asked questions wherever she went. Had anyone seen a great chest of cedar wood carved and beautiful, moving on the current of the Nile? Had the sea thrown anything up onto the shore? Had any ship's captain, any fisherman, any trader passing through noticed anything strange? Most people shook their heads. Some gave her food or water, sensing something in her that commanded quiet kindness, though they could not have said why. One old ferryman told her he had heard from a man who had heard from another man who had sailed west and north that something extraordinary had washed up on a foreign shore, something that had caused a great tree to grow overnight where no tree had stood before. He could not say where, he could not say more. But the current in the air grew stronger when he spoke, and Isis thanked him and moved on. It was the children who helped her most. This is one of the quieter miracles of the story, and worth slowing to consider. Children, in those days as in all days, saw things that adults had learned not to see. They had not yet grown the particular kind of blindness that comes with age, the one that makes people look at the extraordinary and see only the ordinary, because ordinary is safer. Isis, walking through a riverside village one evening, with the sun going red and low, stopped to ask a group of children playing at the water's edge if they had seen or heard anything of a great cedar chest. They had not, but one small girl looked up at her with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that children sometimes use, and said that her grandmother's sister's husband had come from a place called Byblos, far to the north across the sea, and that strange things had been happening there. A tree had grown, enormous and sudden, around something in the ground near the shore. The king of that place had cut the tree and used the trunk as a great pillar in his palace. Nobody knew what was inside the wood. Nobody had thought to ask. Byblos. The word landed in Isis like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples to the very edges of her. She felt it, the rightness of it, the way a long-followed thread suddenly goes taut. She touched the child's cheek gently, said nothing, and turned her face north. The sea crossing was quiet. She did not travel as a goddess travels in stories sometimes, on clouds, on wind, in a flash of divine light. She moved as a mortal woman moves, by boat, through weather, through the long, slow hours of open water, with nothing to see in any direction but the horizon. She let herself feel the grief fully during those hours, out where no one could observe her. She let it move through her like a tide. She did not try to hold it back or hurry it along. She simply let it be what it was, and when the shore of Byblos finally appeared, pale and distant in the morning light, she had come to the other side of something. Not healed, not resolved, but steadied in the way that deep water steadies in the time between storms. She came ashore and sat beside a freshwater spring near the edge of the city and waited. This, too, was wisdom. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful thing one can do is simply be present, be still, and let the world arrange itself around that stillness. She braided her hair quietly. She watched the women who came to draw water from the spring. She said little, asked nothing. But the women noticed her. How could they not? There was something about her, a quality of attention, a depth of calm, that drew people the way warmth draws people on a cold night, without anyone having to announce that there is a fire. The queen's handmaidens came to the spring each morning, and after a few days they began to linger near her, to sit beside her, to talk. She said she was a stranger, a traveler, a woman who had come a long way and had further still to go. She asked gently whether she might be of service at the palace while she rested from her journey. And so it was that Isis, goddess of magic and devotion, wife of the great Osiris, came to work in the palace of the king of Byblos as a nurse to the royal children. She braided hair. She told quiet stories. She tended to the small, ordinary needs of a household that had no idea who was walking its corridors. All the while, she watched the great pillar. It stood at the center of the hall, tall and smooth and fragrant with the deep green scent of cedar. The king and queen of Byblos admired it for its beauty and its size. Their guests admired it. Lamplight moved across its grain in the evenings, warming the amber tones in the wood. Nobody in that palace felt anything unusual when they stood beside it, except perhaps a faint sense of peace they could not explain, a sense of something sleeping deeply within, the way a house feels different when someone beloved is resting quietly in the next room. Isis felt it with every step she took in that hall. Every breath she drew near that pillar carried something she recognized the way a mother recognized the sound of her child across a crowded room. He was there, inside the wood, inside the dark, patient and still and waiting. She had found him, but finding was only the beginning. The cedar pillar stood in the king's great hall, admired and beloved, load-bearing in more ways than one. It held up not just a roof, but a king's pride, a household's sense of beauty and permanence. To take it would require something more than strength. It would require the long, gentle work of trust, of relationship, of earning what force could never simply take. And so Isis settled in. She tended the children. She told her quiet stories. She waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned in the long years of walking beside Osiris through the world that the most lasting things are not seized, but grown, that love itself is a form of patience, that to care for someone, truly deeply across time and darkness and distance is not a single act, but 1,000 small ones accumulated like water finding its way through stone. The nights in Byblos were warm, and the stars came out bright over the sea, and Isis sat sometimes in the open air and looked up at them for a long while, saying nothing. Those who saw her thought she was simply resting. They did not know that she was speaking in the silent language she had spent ages learning, to everything that would listen, to the dark and the light and the long patient turning of the sky. Holding on, still holding on, the ship moved with the current as though the river itself had agreed to help her home. Isis stood at the prow for much of the journey, one hand resting on the cedar chest that held all she had recovered, all that remained of the man who had once walked these same waters as a king. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She simply watched the banks of Egypt rise slowly from the horizon, that familiar ribbon of green pulling itself out of the desert like a memory returning from a very great distance. She had carried grief across the whole of the known world. Now she carried something else alongside it, something small and luminous, and almost too fragile to name. When the ship at last reached the marshes of the delta, Isis guided it into the deep papyrus thickets, where the reeds grew tall as men, and the water lay still and secret beneath them. This was a hidden place, a place the world had not yet touched with its noise and its restlessness. She chose it carefully, the way one chooses words for a prayer, deliberately and with great tenderness. She drew the chest ashore herself. For a long time she knelt beside it in the shallow mud, her fingers resting flat against the wood, feeling nothing move beneath it, and yet unwilling to step away. The marsh birds called to one another across the water. The evening came on gently, turning the sky above the reeds, the color of embers. Then, at last, she opened the chest. What she did in the hours that followed, the old stories guard carefully. The words she spoke were not words that belonged to daylight. They had been learned in the oldest places, in the spaces between stars, in the long silence before the first god drew breath. She spread her wings, and they were vast, and they moved like a slow wind over still grain, and the air around her shimmered with something that had no name in any human tongue. She breathed upon him, and for a moment, one trembling, sacred, impossible moment, the darkness in Osiris stirred. It was not life as it had been before. It could not be. What Set had put out was not a flame that could simply be relit and left burning. But there was enough, a warmth, a recognition, a thread of something luminous that passed between them in the hush of that hidden marsh. Enough for the mystery she had come to complete. Enough for what the world would need long after both of them were changed beyond all changing. She held him in the dark and the quiet, and she wept, and the marsh absorbed her weeping the way deep water absorbs a stone, without a sound, without a ripple that lasted long. Then it was over. She closed the chest again. She covered it with cut reeds and the broad leaves of the lotus. She sang over it in a low voice, a melody that was also a warding, a protection woven from sound. Satisfied that it was hidden, she slipped away into the night to rest, intending to return before the first light and begin the long work of what must come next. She did not know that Set had eyes in the dark. He had always been a hunter, long before he was a king's brother, long before ambition had curdled into something uglier than itself. Set had been the god of the desert wind, the force that scours and strips and leaves nothing soft. He had spies in the reeds. He had informants among the night creatures, and word reached him, as word always reached those who are hungry for it, that something was being concealed in the marshes of the delta, something that smelled of cedar and of ancient magic. He came like a storm arrives, without warning and all at once. When he found the chest, his fury was not the fury of surprise. It was the fury of a man who had believed something finished and now finds it stubbornly, insultingly unfinished. His rage was cold at its center, the way the heart of a fire is sometimes cold, and it made him precise rather than clumsy. He did not simply destroy what he found, he made certain it could never be restored. He scattered the pieces of Osiris across all of Egypt. Some say 14, some say 42, one for every province, one for every corner of the land that had once loved its king. He flung them into the river and into the desert, into the mountains and the marshlands, into places near and places so remote that no map had ever thought to name them. He worked quickly and without sentiment, the way one dismantles a thing one fears rather than hates, thoroughly and with great care. When he was finished, he stood in the empty marsh and felt for a moment that it was done. He was wrong. Isis found what he had done with the dawn. She stood at the edge of the thicket and looked at the broken reeds, the disturbed mud, the gaping absence where the chest had been. And something moved through her that was beyond grief. Grief she had already carried to the far edge of the world and back. This was something older, something that did not weep but simply gathered itself, the way a storm gathers before it has decided which direction to move. She sent word to her sister. Nephthys came swiftly and without question. She was a quieter goddess than Isis, softer at the edges, but no less steadfast, and she understood without being told what was required. The two sisters stood together in the pale morning light, and between them passed something unspoken, a shared knowledge of what this search would cost, and a shared willingness to pay it. They began again. This search was not like the first one. The first had taken Isis across the wide world along a single thread of fate, following rumor and wind and the instincts of a heart that refused to stop. This search was different. Egypt was not the wide world, but it was vast in its own way, and it was broken now. What had once been a single kingdom, held together by the love of one king, was now a scattered and grieving land, and the pieces of that king lay hidden within it, like seeds dropped by a careless hand into soil that did not know what it carried. They went into the delta and into the deep south. They walked the edge of the desert and waded into the shallows of the great river. Nephthys was gentle in the places that needed gentleness. Isis was relentless in the places that needed relentlessness. Between them they moved like water finding its way through stone, slowly, without ceasing, wearing the world down by the simple insistence of their presence. The people they passed did not always know who they were. Sometimes the sisters disguised themselves as ordinary women, swathed in linen, faces turned from the wind. But the animals knew. The ibises would circle overhead when they drew close to something sacred. The river would grow still at their approach. Even the desert, which gives nothing freely, seemed sometimes to shift its sands aside, to reveal what lay beneath, as though the land itself was ashamed of what had been done within its borders and wished to make what small amends it could. One by one, the pieces came back to them. Each discovery was its own small ceremony. Nephthys would set the thing gently on the cloth they carried between them, and Isis would bend over it and whisper, and the air would change slightly, grow warmer or more still, or take on the faint scent of cedar and kefi that had once filled the great hall where a king held his court. These were not moments of triumph. They were moments of a sorrow so deep it had passed through itself and come out the other side as something almost like peace. Almost. Because she knew, even as she gathered, that she was gathering toward something. Every piece recovered was a step toward a reckoning that had not yet come. Osiris would not remain scattered. She would not allow it. The world would not allow it, though it did not yet know this about itself. And somewhere in the marshes to the north, in the hidden places where the reeds whispered and the water lay dark and close, something was already beginning to grow, small and quiet and unlooked for, like the first green shoot that pushes through the black soil of a field long after anyone thought the season was finished. A child, conceived in miracle, hidden in the delta, not yet ready for the world, but coming toward it with the slow, irresistible patience of a sunrise. The sisters did not stop. The cloth grew heavier between them. The sky above Egypt held its breath, and still they searched, and still they gathered, and the land slowly, slowly gave back what had been taken from it. And so, at last, the gathering was complete. Isis and Nephthys stood together at the edge of the desert, where the sand meets the slow green breath of the river, and between them lay the cloth, heavy now and whole, holding within its folds everything that had been lost. The two sisters were still. The wind had quieted. Even the reeds along the bank seemed to lean in, as though the world itself wished to bear witness to what was about to begin. It was Nephthys who looked up first, her dark eyes catching the last of the evening light. And there, descending from the threshold between sky and earth, came two figures the sisters had been waiting for, though no word had been spoken and no summons had been sent. Some things are simply known in the way that the body knows to breathe, or the river knows its way to the sea. The first was Anubis, tall, silent, wrapped in shadow the way a mountain is wrapped in cloud. His face was that of a jackal, ancient and patient, and in his hands he carried the tools of a craft that had never yet been practiced in this world, for no one had ever needed it before. He was the god of the threshold, the guardian of the space between one life and the next, and he walked toward the sisters without haste, without hesitation, as one who has always known this moment was coming. Beside him came Thoth, carrying his reed and his knowledge like a lantern in a deep room. Thoth, who remembered everything. Thoth, who had watched the world unfold from its very first breath and had written all of it down in the quiet chambers of his heart. He carried with him the words, the sacred and particular words that could bind a soul back to its body, that could persuade the broken to become whole. Together, the four of them worked through the night. There are no words adequate to describe what they did, not because it was beyond imagining, but because it was so careful, so deliberate, so filled with love that to describe it too quickly would be to do it a disservice. Every movement was slow. Every action had a name. Anubis laid out the linen in long and tender lengths, pale as moonlight, soft as the inside of a closed hand. Thoth spoke in a voice so low it was less like sound and more like the memory of sound, words older than the river, older than the stone, words that had been waiting in the dark for exactly this use. Isis was everywhere at once, her hand steady, her eyes clear, though the grief in her was still vast and oceanic. She had moved through sorrow so long that she had learned to carry it the way the sky carries stars, without effort, without ceasing, simply holding them as part of its nature. She rapped and murmured, and pressed her lips to her husband's brow, and where she touched him, the linen seemed to glow with a faint, warm light. Nephthys stayed close at her sister's side, saying little, doing much, her presence a quiet anchor in the long stillness of that night. As the hours moved through their slow procession, something shifted in the air above them. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the way a room changes when someone you love walks into it. A subtle brightening, a sense of rightness, of the world settling into a shape it was always meant to hold. Osiris was becoming whole, not as he had been, not the walking, laughing king who had once moved through sunlit fields with grain in his hands. That chapter had closed, and it would not reopen. But wholeness takes many forms, and the wholeness that was gathering within those wrappings of pale linen was something older and deeper than any life lived under the open sky. It was the wholeness of completion, of a story arriving at its true ending. When the last word had been spoken and the last binding made, Anubis rose and stepped back, and the four of them looked upon what they had done. Osiris lay still, wrapped in white, his form luminous in the early gray of the coming dawn. And then, softly, so softly, his eyes opened, not the eyes of a man waking from sleep, the eyes of something larger, something that had passed through the darkest water and emerged on the far shore, changed in every way that mattered. He looked at Isis, she looked at him. Between them passed something that needed no language. In the time that followed, Osiris descended into the realm beneath the world, the deep and quiet kingdom where all souls eventually travel. And there he took his seat upon the throne that had always been waiting for him. In the hall where the scales are kept and the feather of truth is weighed against the heart of every soul that arrives at the threshold. He became the lord of that realm, not a ruler of power, but a ruler of mercy, not a king who commanded, but one who received, who welcomed the tired and the worthy into a place of rest that had no end. And the souls who arrived there after their long journeys across the bright and difficult world of the living found themselves standing before someone who understood, someone who had known loss and betrayal and the love of those who would not stop searching, someone who had been broken and made whole. Egypt remembered all of it. The priests learned the rites. The wrappings and the words were passed from hand to hand down through the long river of years, and with them the promise, quiet, enduring, and constant as the stars, that death is not the end of the story, only the beginning of a different kind of rest. And somewhere, in the deep and gentle dark beneath the world, Osiris sits still upon his throne, patient and serene, waiting to welcome all who come to him at last.